But so driving in the roundabout, basically it's a roundabout, so you want to slow down, look left, and yield to traffic. And then of course, if there is an opening, you carefully proceed through it and then go to the route that you want to go. If you're going to be proceeding, like if you're on Main Street going eastbound, you want to continue, you stay towards the outside and continue. If you want to make any movement that would cross the tracks, a left-hand turn or U-turn movement, you would get in the left turn bay. So obviously vehicles, as in most cases, must yield to pedestrians, bicyclists as well if you see them crossing the crosswalks. One thing that we had an officer out there when we first opened it on October 18th, and two things he was noting was some of the cars going through the roundabout were actually yielding to cars coming in, and hopefully people learn that no, it needs to be the other way around. The other thing he noted was that pedestrians weren't using the crosswalks, so hopefully we know that people are used to it being a signalized intersection, so we're hoping that before trains start running through that, before they start testing, that we're getting the word out, and maybe that they'll adhere that. I don't know if that's just wishful thinking or not, but we know that this area does have a lot of large vehicles. Mesa Public Schools uses it as one of their bus routes, at least they used to before we started doing construction here. But we know that they will be using it again once our construction's done, as well as RVs and other delivery trucks. So there is a large area which has the truck aprons in the middle on both sides. So here and here. And then on each of the corners, so the actual sidewalk is here. This acts more of a roll curb in this area on all the four corners. So any vehicles making this turn can use that if they need to accommodate their wider turning radius. So the big question is when a train approaches the roundabout.
Yeah.
So
I'm used to roundabouts being continuous flow.
Right. So it's actually not too bad. There's two lanes. One if you're making the left hand or U-turn movement. So there is a bay for that. So if you're not crossing the tracks and you want to stay on Main Street, you're going eastbound, you yield here. If no one's oncoming, then you can continue through this lane and then continue that way through Main Street, even if a train's coming. There will be nothing blocking your way and no reason for you to have to stop. If you are in a car and you're making a movement that would cross the tracks, let's say you're going eastbound on Main Street and you want to go northbound on Horne, so you come here, you get into this left turn bay, you will have a gate that comes down in this area. The white markings just represent there will be there are painted markings on the ground, just kind of giving you a guide where to stop, but there is a gate here on both sides that will come down, similar to a freight train gate. If you've ever driven in Tempe on University, they have gates that come down when it's crossing University as well, so it'll be identical to that. This will hold about 3 or 4 cars, so there may be a case if you ever have more cars than that, then cars entering will have to yield there until the train passes, but typically that won't be too long, 30 seconds or 45 while the gates would be down the whole time. But then once the train passes, the gates will come up and then you can proceed on your route. So the only way you would really have an issue of a train is if you weren't adhering with the gate that was down. So we tried to make it easy for people. If you're walking or biking in the roundabout, so we really want people to cross at the designated crosswalks. It is the safest points to cross, and then even with all the safety features that we're adding, we still want people to also look and just be safe, just be aware of your surroundings. But so if a train is coming, there is going to be a sign between the tracks here. You may have seen the symbol if you're driving along light rail, and you'll see this black kind of sign up above, and then when a train's coming, you'll see it flash kind of the train, an image that looks like a train coming. That's the image that will be on this sign. So that'll be the first thing that will alert you that a train is coming. There will be, so the crosswalk that crosses the tracks on both sides of the roundabout has some in-ground lights that are red that will be flashing, and you know, for people that may be looking down at their phones as they're crossing some tracks or something, you know, that's just something for people like that may be focused on more towards the ground. But another element that will warn you, and then of course where the gates are coming down, it will be similar to the freight train where them making the noise when the gates are coming down while the train is crossing, so that's more of an auditory warning as well. And biking in the roundabout, so there are ramps where all these circles are. So if you're biking eastbound in this bike lane, there's a ramp that will put you up on the sidewalk. And then wherever you want to cross, you can go to the crosswalk. Let's say you want to continue on Main Street, you would cross here. Of course, you know, cars are supposed to yield for you, but you always want to make sure as well, you never know. And then when you continue on, there is another ramp to put you back on the street, and the same on the north side as well. Emergency vehicles, we're trying to cover all our bases, so the main thing is don't stop in the roundabout. You don't want to prevent the emergency vehicle from going on their route, so you want to just proceed kind of whichever route you were taking, and obviously if the emergency vehicle is going a different direction, they'll have that opportunity to go the other way. If they're still behind you when you're going on your route, then you just take the first opportunity to wherever, you know, if you're going northbound on Horne, once you get to a point where you can pull over and then get around, that's what you do. If there's the case where there's an emergency vehicle coming behind you, a train is coming, and the gates come down, you still want to just adhere to the gates, and even if the emergency vehicle is right behind you with the flashing lights, just wait till it's safe to proceed. The gate comes up and then you still continue on your route, and then like before, whenever there's an opportunity to pull to the side, you do that. At this point, do you mind helping me with I kind of explained everything, but it's also nice to see it. We developed a computer simulation for it, so that's what David's going to put up. Just basically saying everything I just told you, but you can see it in nice graphics.
As part of the Gilbert Road light rail extension, a roundabout is being constructed at the Main Street and Horne intersection. Roundabouts that include light rail are designed to help traffic flow smoothly and safely. Motorists in the roundabout have the right of way. When entering the roundabout, slow down or yield to traffic approaching from the left. When it is safe to do so, carefully proceed into the roundabout. Keep in mind, light rail vehicles travel straight through the roundabout while other vehicles move slowly in a counterclockwise direction. Buses, trucks, recreational vehicles, and trailers can all travel through the roundabout. There are truck aprons at each intersecting street to allow for a greater turning radius. When approaching the roundabout, choose the appropriate lane. Stay right when entering the roundabout to turn right. To turn left or make a U-turn, use the left turn lanes of the roundabout until you reach your exit. As a train approaches the roundabout, lights will flash, bells will activate, and crossing gates will come down to block vehicles in the left lane of the roundabout. Drivers wishing to cross the light rail tracks will queue in the lane and must wait until after the train passes and the warnings have stopped. Vehicles traveling eastbound or westbound on Main Street will be allowed to continue their travel while the train is crossing through the intersection in the same east-west direction. Drivers traveling north or southbound on Horne will also be able to continue on Main Street unless their direction of travel crosses the train tracks, in which case they will yield until after the train passes and the warnings have stopped. Vehicles must yield to and wait for pedestrians and bicyclists using the roundabout crosswalks. Bicyclists on Main Street approaching the roundabout should exit the bike lanes in the designated areas and continue on sidewalks to the crosswalks. Upon exiting the roundabout, the bike lanes will continue on Main Street adjacent to the roadway. Pedestrians and bicyclists should always cross at the designated crosswalks and look in both directions for oncoming vehicles and trains. When walking or biking in the roundabout, watch and listen for the warnings of an oncoming train. Electric signs will flash with the train image, in-ground lights will flash in the crosswalk, and bells will sound. When the lights and bells are activated, pedestrians and bicyclists are required to wait to cross the light rail tracks. You may cross only after the train passes and the warnings have stopped. Of course, after looking both ways for oncoming vehicles and trains. If an possible. Don't stop while in the roundabout. If an emergency vehicle enters the roundabout while you're waiting for an oncoming train, wait until after the train passes and the warnings have stopped. Then exit the roundabout as soon as possible. Always remember when driving through the roundabout. Slow down. Yield to pedestrians and bicyclists. Look left. Watch for vehicles, trains, emergency vehicles, and proceed with caution.
Okay, do you mind? So just a few more slides. Extending beyond Gilbert Road. So if they're already looking at that, that time frame and nothing's on the map, that's not to say that things couldn't be advanced, but there's the money issue of not only for construction, but you need money to first do a study. Does it stay on Main Street or does it go south on Gilbert Road? And the study usually takes about 3 years to do. And then the money for the construction, and then for operations after it's in as well. But people are always asking me, when's it going to go to Superstition Springs Mall or Williams Gateway Airport? And I say, this will probably be the beginning of the light rail system for, I would say, at least 20 years or more, which sometimes it's interesting when I take a call, because I never know how people are going to respond to that. But if it's a business owner, they're usually happy about that. If they're like at Lindsay or so. But that's unfortunately, that's probably the case. There is a study that they're looking at light rail in Mesa. It could be light rail or other some high capacity transit to go south on Dobson Road, over on Southern to about Country Club area, and that would be the only thing that they're really looking at right now for Mesa. But of course Phoenix has other extensions that are planned as well.
I'll add that so all the light rail that you see paid for right now, same as with the 202, the 101, the 303, that was all paid for with Prop $400. Prop 400, right?
Yes.
Prop $400, and that expires here in 2023.
I think so.
So all of the money that paid for that, it was primarily highways, and there was a small amount for light rail. We are looking at globally whether or not there is another set of that, because it also pays for additional bus routes and of course road maintenance and things like that. And so that may be coming up on the ballot in the next 5 years. To see if we could either look at future extensions and things like that. I would say ridership has always been the question about going further east than Gilbert. Gilbert is where you pick up a lot of riders, but further east you have to get really far away, and light rail may or may not be the right technology for that. We also have intercity rail that's been studied, and there's a plan for that, but no funding, which would connect Phoenix with Tucson through Mesa. And then Chandler and Mesa have talked about connections through Banner and MCC with light rail. But those are all plans. They're not plans, they're ideas, they're concepts that were studied. There's no funding and there's no future.
So it probably would take a vote that would have to pass first, and then really from the timeline of a study starting through construction, I think for Gilbert Road, it was like a 12-year process between the start of the, maybe before the study actually, but more of the idea of the concepts coming out, and then through that whole process, I think it took about 12 years. So it'll be a while before it extends beyond that. Any other questions? Okay. Well, yes.
Yesterday I had to go over to Glendale.
Yes.
On the I-10, I think, man, it would be so nice if there was a rail
Yes.
going to the west. But that's not Mesa. That's
there was a plan to take it to downtown Glendale, because then people always ask about Cardinal Stadium. But the first phase was to take it to the downtown Glendale area. But after they had already done the studies and found out an alignment, the council, whatever reason they wanted, decided to vote against it and vote it down. So yeah, no light rail in Glendale for a while. But like with anything, never say never. Like, people could change, and then you had more of the community want light rail out there, and things could always change for any area of town. So, okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, it took longer than 10 minutes, I think.
And what? What's that?
Exactly. That's what everybody says. What's home rule?
I
We
voted
have all
on
these
it
other
before,
questions
but I
that
don't
I've had
remember what
figured
it
out,
is.
but what's the home rule question? So the presentation I have here is actually a presentation that I have put together to answer that. We did 2 to the city council, so just remind you that I'm Candace, and I'm the management and budget director for the city of Mesa. So if any of you watch Channel 11 at all, if you watch it in the spring, I'm usually on it, giving some type of a presentation to council. So we've had 2 different presentations we've given, and then what we did for all of these different ballot questions, we kind of put together one presentation of a hodgepodge of all the different slides that have gone to council for all the different questions. So the presentation that you actually have a copy of, it's out on our website as well, but it actually covers all of the questions, but I'm just going to cover question 1 today for home rule. So those are the 6 questions that we have. It's actually called Alternative Expenditure Limitation. So that's the official name, but you hear it as home rule all the time. That's what we call it. Okay. So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay. So what is home rule? Why do we need to have this question? So the Arizona Constitution, number 1, we have to adopt a balanced budget, regardless. It doesn't matter whether home rule passes or home rule doesn't pass. We have to adopt a budget balanced budget. It doesn't change. Balanced budget means that we can't budget expenditures greater than the resources we have available. That could be new revenues coming in, but it also could be fund balance, money that we have saved maybe from a previous year. So it's resources in total. Okay. This doesn't change this. Back in 1979-80, there was what was called an expenditure limitation that was put into the state constitution. And what that says is that whatever budget the city of Mesa had in 1979-80, that is now your base. Okay? Then a formula is applied to it. It says you can only grow your budget based on the growth in population in your city plus a CPI, Consumer Price Index, so inflation. Okay? So it's a population and inflation is how you can grow your budget. So that was the way of trying to limit local spending, right? So only grow it based on that. Okay? However, they also knew that that may not always work for all the municipalities. And so you're able to do an alternative for it. So if you have a local election, your voters can approve for an alternative to that expenditure limitation. So that's where it comes from. So that's what we're going to talk about. There are 3 different alternatives that a city can do. Home rule is what we're going to talk about today. So home rule is what the city of Mesa has chosen to pursue. And home rule allows basically the city council to, and I'm sorry if I'm in the way here, but it allows the city council to control the budget. It allows the city council to set that expenditure. Again, it has to be balanced. So the expenses can't be greater than the resources available. That doesn't get you out of that. But unless you set it at whatever level needs to be set for that particular year, depending on what's going on. And I'll talk to you about the different things that go into a budget and why that might not necessarily follow the formula. There's also a permanent base adjustment that you can do, and that would actually be going back and adjusting what that 79 base was. And it just, when it says permanent, that means because you're going back and it's kind of you're resetting that base one time, and then the formula then is applied to that new base. So you're still following the formula, but you're just adjusting the base. You're saying, well, 7980 doesn't work for us, it really should be this number, and then adjust it. Okay? And there's a one-time override that allows you to do it just for 1 fiscal year. So I should say the home rule is for 4 fiscal years. So the question is, why do we have to vote on this every 4 years? We've approved this for, 6 times now. Okay? It's only good for 4 years, it expires, it sunsets. So you have to come back and do it again. So it's not ongoing. The permanent is, because you're just in the base. So, and then the last one is just the 1 year. You can do a 1 year. If you need an emergency override for something, if you have a big expenditure that's coming up, you could probably do just a 1 year type of thing. Okay. So home rule, the first one, alternative was approved by voters in March of 2000. Okay, we actually had one way back in the 80s. We let it, that one expired. We didn't need it, not in the 80s, yeah, in the 80s when it first started. The city of Mesa was able to stay under that formula limit through the 80s and through the 90s. Okay, so we didn't need to do the home rule. I say we, I wasn't here, but The city of Mesa was not, had to do it. But in March of 2000, we did go out and do the home rule again, home rule election, and it passed. I was here for that, so I've been here for every home rule election since 2000. And there's a real good reason why we had to go in 2000, and I'll show you that a little bit on a later slide. Why all of a sudden we needed to have home rule and couldn't follow the formula anymore. It was renewed again in 2004, 2008, 2010. The reason why there's only a 2-year is because the elections changed from spring elections to fall elections, if some of you might have remembered that. And then that caused us, it would expire before we'd be able to have an election, so we had to go 2 years prior in order to kind of restart our 4-year time frame. And then again back in 2014, so our current one will expire on June 30th of 2019. So it doesn't affect this year's budget, it affects next year's budget, 1920, fiscal year 1920. Okay, I'm kind of going to gloss over this real quick, but basically the state has a penalty. They have a penalty for cities for everything that we do. And so every penalty they have for us is they take our state shared revenues. That's what they threaten to do for any time we go against any of their rules or regulations. And so it's the same way here. So if we were to not have home rule, we'd have expenditure limitation, we would follow the formula. If we were to spend more than what was in that formula, we would be hit with a penalty that we would then owe the state. So we'd have to pay the state. And how far over you go depends on how much you actually have to pay. And you can see it's kind of based on how far over, whether 5%, between 5 and 10, or greater than 10. They can take up to 1/3 of all of our state shared revenue, which is a lot of money. So you can see for us, our penalty would have been, if 1/3 would have been $20 million. That would have been our fine if we had gone over more than 10% of our expenditure limitation. Okay, so why did we go out for an election in 2000? Well, we had an election prior to that called Quality of Life Sales Tax. So the Quality of Life Sales Tax was voted on by the voters of Mesa and was passed to increase the sales tax, local sales tax, by 0.25%. Okay, that brings in revenue into the city. In today's dollars, it's about $25 million a year just for that one sales tax increase. That is currently funding public safety. It's 120 officers and it's 65 firefighters that were wrapped into that quality of life initiative. That didn't exist in 1979-80, which means it's not in our base. Okay, which means it's not in the formula. Okay, so it's outside of the formula. So that's kind of that you can see that's where we needed to go out and do alternative expenditure limitation. Okay, but since there we've had other votes and we've had other sales tax or revenue increases. We've had the local street sales tax and the general fund sales tax were both on the same ballot, and it was increasing it by 0.5%, and it was split between, it just so happens that the math works out this year, that 0.25% is $25 million and 0.3% is $30 million. It's just great math for this particular year. And so that one was an increase to the street sales tax fund is dedicated just to street sales tax, can only be used for streets, maintenance, and construction. And that's about $30 million in today's dollars. And then the general fund increase, which is unrestricted, is $20 million. So that just supports general operations. So you can see right there, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it adds up pretty fast, right? You're at $75 million. That was voted on by the voters in Mesa and approved, but not included in the base, because we didn't have it in 1979-80. And there's some other things that have just kind of come over. There's different things when they change accounting rules, and sometimes when they change how we expense things, that just kind of goes into the formula. It's how the formula is written, that some things kind of count against us as it goes into there. But that's basically, if you look at it, that's why a 1979-80 base formula doesn't take into account changes. Even though they were approved by the citizens of Mesa, they're not in the formula. Okay. So when we look at what would happen if we don't, if it's not approved, okay, so if it's not approved on November 6th, then our 1920 budget would be the first one that would be impacted. We would have to follow the formula, so we would have to cap out at our expenses, our budget expenses at that formula, and we're estimating about a $200 million impact. That does not mean that we don't have the money, the revenue, so it does not change the revenue side of it. It just means that we would not have the authority to spend it. Okay. because it's an expenditure limitation, not a revenue limitation. It doesn't change anything on the other side. Also, a lot of people ask me, well, is this going to increase my taxes? Home rule does not change the revenues at all. So this ballot measure doesn't change the revenues the city received. It does not increase them or decrease them. It has zero effect on the revenues. It's specifically expenditures only. So it just caps the expenses that a city can have. It doesn't do anything with the revenues, up or down. Okay. Things that are not included. So it is a formula with a lot of exceptions to the rules. So it does not include things like bond proceeds. That's how we finance large construction projects. So those don't count in the formula, which means you can't decrease those from the budget to get underneath the formula. There's no impact to those. They're already excluded. Debt service is already excluded. Our HERF, which is highway user funds, which comes from the state, those are excluded from it. Joint ventures, any of our grants, so we could still spend all grant money. That wouldn't help. That wouldn't bring it down. Our trust funds, we're self-insured, so we have a few insurance trust funds, like our employee benefit trust fund is self-insured. Our liability funds are self-insured. Those are also excluded. So when we talk about the $200 million, and you say, well, what would you take out of the budget to add up to the $200 million? You can't take anything from this category here, because it's not in the formula to begin with. It's excluded to begin with. Okay. So where is it? Where would it come from? Those are the things that are not in that. The bulk of our expenditures that would be subject to the limitation are going to be in our general governmental funds. We count that as our general fund and that quality of life I talked about. So the quality of life is restricted, but it falls under the expenditure limitation. And then also our local street sales tax. Again, it's a restricted sales tax, but it's just sales tax according to the formula. It's not exempt. It falls under the expenditure limitation. So that's the bulk of it. For this year's budget, that adds up to $475.7 million. So those three funds together. Okay. And if we estimate $200 million in order to get ourselves down, it would be about 42% of those funds. And so to give you kind of a perspective, out of that $475 million, the public safety departments, which we count as police, fire, and court. Court goes with police, right? So those are our public safety departments, are $261.8 million. All other departments combined are $213. That's all of the support. That's fleet services, warehouse, budget, human resources, accounting, all of those kind of departments, which are all support departments.
Garbage.
They're actually in an enterprise fund, the solid
They're
waste.
excluded.
Yeah. They're not excluded. So I should point out, we don't put enterprises on here. They're not excluded, but they're revenue generating.
Yeah.
So if we were to decrease those, we would also
Decrease
lose money.
revenue.
Right. So all of our enterprises are revenue generating, so we wouldn't stop picking up your garbage. We can't anyway, by the way. That's a state requirement as well, that we pick up the garbage. But so that's basically when you're looking at it. Yes, we do have other enterprises, but they are revenue generating enterprises, so you wouldn't decrease expenses, you'd also end up decreasing your revenues. Plus, they're usually services, water, wastewater, gas, electric, solid waste.
Important.
Those types of things. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. So when we talk about the $200 million, and a lot of people say, some people might say, well, $200 million, just don't build stuff. Because I hear that a lot, well, we just won't build stuff. Remember, building stuff is financed. Usually they're very large projects and they're bond proceeds with debt service attached. And it actually is excluded from the formula. So it doesn't help us on the $200 million that we're looking for. We end up looking for operational type items. Okay. And then this is actually how the question reads. So if you already got your ballot in the mail, which I think most people do who get the early, they get it delivered to you. This is actually how it reads. And so what I said is an alternative expenditure limitation, but we use home rule because that's the option that we're using. And it shall Mesa, Arizona be allowed pursuant to the Arizona State Constitution to continue a local alternative expenditure limitation equal to the city's fiscal year budget established by the mayor and city council through the annual budget process. So again, it is good for 4 years, but the council only adopts 1 year at a time. So every year, they'll go through the budget process. It will still need to be balanced, expenditures to resources. And then it still has to be passed. For our council, we need to pass it with 5 votes. It's a supermajority, not just a majority. So it's 5 votes in order to adopt the budget, and they're setting then the limit of when we set that. So that basically what the question's about, in a nutshell. Questions on that?
I'll open it up for questions,
Okay.
but Yvonne stole his ballot real quick. This is the ballot that you may have already finished voting. It's over here. And Yvonne just pointed out that the council is down here. It's almost invisible down there.
Yeah, I think it starts with the ballot questions, yeah. So yeah, I think it doesn't start with the ballot questions
After
first, and then
business.
the council comes after the ballot questions. Yeah.
So,
Is that how it's set up?
question 1, question 2, question 1, question 2, question 3. So question 1.
So don't miss question 1, don't start on this
That's
column.
Mesa Unified School District, question 1. And then this is City of Mesa, question 1.
And I should have started this with, as a staff member for the City of Mesa, I am not telling you to vote yes or no on question 1. We are staff and we make recommendations. It is up to you, the voters, to decide whether you would like us to continue home rule or do you want us to follow the state formula.
I will add, as a 501c3 nonprofit, we don't take positions on any election basis at all, but we do provide education so people can learn about what the choices can lead to.
So I have a question, mostly because I'm curious. Why do we do home rule and not the permanent base adjustment?
Great question. So back in 2000, we actually looked at both. So before we put it on the ballot, we actually looked at both to see which one we thought would work better for Mesa. There are a lot of small municipalities who actually do the permanent base. They're because they're so small, their population has grown so much, and that the formula actually is not that bad. They could do a very small permanent base adjustment, and then it kind of took care of it for a long time. There'll be a long time before they have to do it again. Because permanent means it's permanent, but it doesn't mean you don't have to do it another time. Depends on how fast you're growing and how fast your expenses are. When we looked at it, it was going to be we thought it'd be a very large number that we'd have to do as an adjustment. And we thought that the education would be harder on the fact that it's permanent. I'm kind of glad that we didn't do it because there were after quality of life, had we done a permanent base, then we had more sales tax. And then we had other adjustments that we did that we would still be back either doing another permanent base or we'd be coming back for home rule anyway at this point. One or the other, because we've had so many changes in our revenue streams, it's made a big difference on that side. Doesn't mean that we won't do it in the future. There could be a time that it makes more sense. Maybe our revenue streams are stable. Our population, we're starting to get toward build out, so we kind of know what our population is going to be. We're building out all of our facilities right now. And so we might get to a point that we think we're kind of more stable, that we can actually look 10 years to 20 years in the future and see where we need to be, because that's where you have to do your base on, right? Because you don't want to do your permanent base and then in 5 years you've outgrown it. So you have to do it large enough that you won't outgrow it quickly, but not too large that citizens don't feel like, if I say that, that's what you're going to spend next year. And that's what, me personally, I feel that that's harder to educate. If you come up with a big number and they go, oh, well, you're just going to spend all that next year, you just want the capacity to spend more money. And that's not really what it is. Eventually, I think we'll end up doing a permanent base. I just don't think the timing is right now. The home rule works out for us really well. And it does allow you to come back every 4 years, and we talk about it again, and we educate again, and we talk about how it's really just, we kind of try to sum it up, it's just local control of setting your budget. So it allows the city council control of setting the budget. If there's something very large we want to do as a cash project, some of the things I didn't talk about in here that we did talk about with council is that you saw that the debt service is excluded, right? Oops. Debt service and bond proceeds are excluded. There's some big things that we did. For example, we did the Mesa Art Center was a cash project. It was not financed. That year, that would have gone against our expenditure limitation. So it really wouldn't follow the formula, right? Because it was a very large outpouring of cash in 1 year. For a facility, it's going to last a very long time, but the expenditure happened within 2 years, let's say, because it's probably an 18-month construction cycle. So it would have happened over 2 years, very large, but the formula doesn't take that into consideration. Had we financed it, it would. But we did it as cash, saved money on interest, right? Because it was probably the quality of life. The quality of life started out as a 0.5%. Half of it went to capital and sunset in 10 years, and the other half was ongoing to pay for operations. So what's going on in the municipality? If you want to do a lot of cash projects, and so your expenditures are going to go up and down depending on what year you're doing your projects in, then the formula, it doesn't work for you. If you're very even, maybe you're, you don't own your facilities, like some of the small ones, they don't have their own water, they have a water district. You know, they have different districts, they have a fire district, that type of thing, and they're more of a service, they're really paying more of a subscription fee. Their expenses are going to be very level, and so the formula may work for them going through. So every municipality is going to be a little bit different. I would say right now home rule seems to be the better one for us, but I would not rule out doing a permanent base in the future when we kind of stabilize a little bit more.
There was an Arizona Republic article that we posted in the event page on Facebook that sort of outlined what cities do home rule, what cities do the base adjustment, and what cities just live with it. And it's pretty much every big city does home rule. The medium-sized rural cities tend to do the base adjustment, and then the smaller cities don't. Would be my lumping of the 400 and something cities in the state of Arizona.
I think there's only 91, but you're probably, if you add counties in. So if you just look at municipalities.
Okay.
So I think there's about 91 registered municipalities, and I think 71 of them have one or the other, either a home rule or a permanent base. So that kind of tells you just what the norm is out there.
I just read a different article.
So
Yeah.
is the norm also adopting it every 4 years? I mean,
Yeah, for home rule,
renewing it?
yeah, there's only been a few that have not passed. Tucson did not pass one time, and for their home rule, they decided to live within the formula for 2 years, and then they went out and did a permanent base adjustment, and then that passed. And so they're now under the permanent base adjustment. I think there was one other, and I can't remember what the other one was. It was a smaller city.
It's
that
like
didn't
Kingman
pass.
or Lake Havasu City.
Yeah, it was one of those
something.
kind of a smaller city. But for the most part, they do. In the past, our elections, they have passed. It has not been close. I don't remember what they were on. Chandler just had theirs during the primary election. They put theirs on the primary ballot. We put ours on the general. Theirs on the ballot, and theirs passed, I think it was like 84% in favor of theirs. And so they tend to pass. Usually when we explain that it doesn't cause any more, it's just the ability to spend the revenues, and it's letting your council that you elected set it based on what's going on in their city. So again, it's your choice.
So what's the likely move, let's say that it didn't pass, then, to cut 200 million, I mean, that's like super, super aggressive. Then you overspend, I guess, according to the budget. I know you have the money, but then you incur the penalties. And, I mean, is there a likely scenario the city would follow? Or, actually make the 200, is it even possible to make the 200 million cut?
I can tell you that based on looking at the numbers there, I can tell you that it wouldn't be possible to hit the 200 million without affecting all departments. That would include public safety. Obviously, public safety is a priority for the city of Mesa, but we really wouldn't put together an implementation plan until after the election, because it would really be up to the council. So we would go back and we would come up with all of our recommendations and options. We do have the option of coming back for the 1 year, so maybe it's possible that the voters didn't want 4 years, but maybe they would allow the 1 year. You can do that one off cycle. The other two you can't. You can only do the elections when there are council members being elected. So that's why you can only go every 2 years. So you couldn't come back like a year from now and do a normal home rule election, because it wouldn't be allowed. There's no council members up for election. So we only have every 2 years are our options. So if it didn't pass, we wouldn't be able to do the full home rule till 2 years. But I know when Chandler did not do their home rule 1 year, not that it didn't pass, they forgot to have their election. I think it was when the elections changed.
Didn't plan for that.
Went from the spring to the fall, and so they missed it. So they missed it and then they couldn't have it because they didn't have people up for election. They did 2 1-years and then went out and did the home rule. So they would do the 1 year because you can do it off cycle. Because it's considered more of like an emergency 1 year type of a thing. They can go off cycle. So, it happens sometimes. So there's ways around it. So that's what we would do as staff. We're always thinking about what are the different possibilities that we could do. And I can't really tell you what we would do, except that we're always thinking about it. So November 7th, we already have every November 7th after an election, we have a meeting scheduled with my staff to prepare, to talk about whatever it is that happened the night before, good or bad. Because for us, there's action required on both sides. If the bond election questions pass, there's a lot of things that we need to do because now we need to start working on all that. And if they fail, then there's a lot of things also we need to do because all of that planning is in our system. So no matter whether something passes or fails, there's always we're working on it the next day. And so so if it were not to pass, that's what we'd be doing. We'd clean our calendars and that's what we would do and come back to council with a recommendation.
Any other questions?
Curious, what happens if it doesn't pass? Does it automatically revert to one of the other options, or does that
If you
force
automatically,
another election?
if it doesn't pass, it just means that option was not passed, and then we are subject to the state
Basic.
formula.
Oh.
So we're under the 79 base with the formula projected out.
Which would happen next summer, that it would come into effect if there
29.
wasn't
Right,
a
it would be the
special
19, it'd be the 1920, the next fiscal year budget, so this fiscal year budget is 1920. So it'd be over this next spring. The council would be working on setting the budget for 1920. It would be part of that process where we were getting ourselves down. And trust me, we'd be looking for every exclusion possible. So when we did the estimate for the 200 million, we're looking at what we think are exclusions, but since we've had it in place since 2000, we know what's excluded, but we haven't gone through every line item of expenditures. First thing we would do is go through every line item of expenditures and try to exclude as much as possible to get that number. Hopefully maybe it's not 200 million because maybe we can find some more exclusions. And those are the types of things that we would look at. So
What happens to the excess monies that we collect that we can't spend because the other taxes?
they would stay in our fund balance. So we
Okay.
would still have them. We would still, there's different things we can do because we invest. So we always have a fund balance, and that fund balance is always being invested in order to earn interest on that. So that's one thing
So
we
we
can
don't
do.
lose
There's other
interest.
options that we can do. There's options that we can do that are based on things that are excluded, those types of things. So we still have it. We still have the money. The fund balances may rise. We might get more interest on them, those types of things. But in the meantime, we wouldn't be able to spend them on the operations. And so we don't lose the money. We don't lose any money. We just don't have the ability to spend it.
And ultimately, it would be city council's decision, if it didn't pass, on how to respond to that. To
Correct.
either reduce by 200 million or whatever that number is, to pay the fine, or to, and reduce just by the fine amount, I guess. Or
Right, and
Or-
I've had that posed to me as well. People have said, well, $20 million is less than $200 million. Why wouldn't we just spend whatever we want and pay the $20 million? And we can do that. My response is usually, but the $20 million is taxpayer dollars that are being sent to the state
Donated to our
with
state
no benefit
legislators.
to our residents. Where the $200 million is just, we still have the money, we just can't spend it yet.
And the third option would be city council could refer at an off-cycle election to do a 1 year.
Or do a 1 year, correct.
So and
And
it
you
really
still have
ends
to
up
pass,
being,
right, you still have to pass, but they can refer and do a 1 year.
and so it really ends up being city council's prerogative. In addition, they already set the budget, so it's fascinating, but it ends up all being in city council's
Right.
hands.
But what we would do is we would put together a package of recommendations, which was probably a potpourri of a whole lot of things, right? Of what we could, here's what it would look like if we did the reductions, here's what it would look like if we did this. And by the way, we'd also probably recommend doing, depending on what the approval, non-approval rate was, would we recommend going out for the one-time election as well. So, and that would be, a list of options for council to look at, and then it would be up to them to make the final decision.
One last question. Would you or someone in your department be willing to come back maybe late winter, early spring to talk about the city budget?
Absolutely. I love to talk about the city budget.
Me too. It's fascinating and big. We're a big city. I don't think people realize.
$1.82 billion.
They're like, oh, 500,000 people, you know, we don't feel that big, but our budget is larger than the state of Arizona's budget. We do a lot more than the state of Arizona does, but it's
Then there's
big.
general. And that's what a lot of people say about, they're like, well, you have a $1.82 billion budget. What's $200 million? Why can't you find $200 million in $1.82 billion? Until we point out how much of that is debt service, how much of that is trust fund, how much of that is grants, how much of that is all of these other things that are excluded. You know, the HERF, the money that's coming in from the state for that. So once you exclude all of that, then you get down to, oh, well, it's really only $475 million, and now $200 million sounds much more than out of the $475 million. But we get that question a lot because they'll see our total budget when we're not doing home rule, and they'll say, well, that's so large, what's 7 million, what's 8 million, when we have to do those reductions, which we've had to do.
Your actual discretionary budget.
Right, the actual, exactly, is much less. You know, during the recession in 08-09, we had to reduce the general fund budget by $64 million. It was just the general fund budget. It was only about $350 million to start with. And so, that was huge. We'll get the same questions. You have a $1 billion budget. Why is, I mean, yes, it's big, but you know, that type of thing. But when you really get down to the discretionary, you said the discretionary dollars and the non-enterprise dollars, the non-revenue generating dollars.
And if I recall correctly, that was a 10% staffing reduction citywide.
It was over 300 positions. I want to say about 320, somewhere in there. I don't know. I don't remember exactly. It's been a few years.
Yeah.
But it was over 300 positions. We did a lot of attritions. There was a lot of
early retirement.
Right. So we had layoffs. It was the first time we actually had layoffs or reduction in workforce, RIFs, that went through. And it was really for us, it was a 2-year process. It started out in our development services area because they're the ones who took the hit the first time. It was building. People stopped building. People stopped pulling permits. So they were the first ones to take kind of the hit. And then as it went deeper, then we had to go through the rest of the city. And eventually we did get to public safety in year 3.
And this would be the opposite because the economy seems to be doing fine, but then we would have to still provide the services to keep our economy going well, but reduce something at the city level in order to meet these goals.
Right. If home rule were to not pass,
it would be very different.
It's very different
bigger.
because you're hoping you're doing it temporarily, right? So during the recession, those were permanent. Those were permanent reductions. Those positions were not coming back, at least not for the foreseeable future. That would be different, right? This we would hope would be temporary because we would hope would either do a permanent base or with the home rule. We would do the 1-year home rule, or we would do something. We would hope there would be something else that we would do. So that would be a different tactic, right? Because you have their funds. It's an administrative issue that you're trying to deal with, and so that would be a different tack than in the past. So yeah, during the recession, we knew those were. We didn't pretend that those were temporary reductions. Those were permanent reductions at the time that we did them.
And those reductions were like around 60 million, right?
Yeah, it was $64 million out of the,
so it's no
back then, right.
It's like a third of what this would be as far as looking at.
right. And it's about the same, this is a little bit higher because this is 400 out of 475, and that one was 64 out of about $300 million, 320 million on there of what we reduced then. But again, it's a different context, right? Because we have the funds, it's an administrative issue. And we have the funds, we just wouldn't have the authority to actually spend them. And so that's a completely different mindset and different tactic that the city would take to get over what we would see as hopefully a temporary issue that hopefully we could fix. Right. Again, with another, either a permanent base or another election or something like that.
All right, well.
Any other questions?
No,
That's it. We're 3 minutes over. So
okay,
we started 3 minutes late. So
boom! All right.
Oh, and I did put out if you want to get involved in the community and shape a lot of the things that are going on, there are 2 workshops. One is tomorrow night, building the Mesa Smart City. There's a little explanation on that, and it is on Facebook and Eventbrite. It is free, and the schedule is also on Facebook. So it's
Just have to
tomorrow night.
RSVP.
Just RSVP.
But I hear there's snacks.
Yes, the first hour is snacks, so it's worth showing up for just at least that. And then some workshops. And then Site 17, the infamous Site 17 at Mesa Drive-In University. So this is the first of a series of taking community input and the development that will be there. So
It's really the next step in community input, because we had a lot of community input
yes.
over the last couple of years on it, and this is actually refining that vision to create a model for what does the former south side of Washington Escobedo that we bulldozed look like in the future, and where do we go with that?
in this space.